Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going deep into the world of Kevin Stewart.
Kevin Stewart.
Yeah, a young man from Thornhill, Ontario. But here's the catch.
Thornhill.
Our source material isn't a scientific study or a news article. It's Kevin's personal blog posts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
we're going deep into the blogosphere this time.
Okay, so how deep can we really go with just blog posts, you might be thinking? Well,
Right.
Kevin's writing is incredibly raw and unfiltered, giving us a unique look into the mind of a young autistic adult facing the challenges of daily life.
Kevin writes about everything, his frustrations, his desires, his struggles with family, even his intense feelings about technology and society. We're talking very strong language.
Yeah.
Very emotional, definitely not your average blog.
Exactly, and that's why this deep dive is so fascinating. By exploring Kevin's words, we're not just reading a diary, we're trying to understand the deeper meaning behind them. What does his writing tell us about his experience as an autistic person, about the pressures he faces, and about the gaps in support that many young adults like him experience?
So let's start by getting to know Kevin a bit better. What's his life like?
He's 24 years old, lives with his mother, and works part-time at a Sobeys grocery store. He's diagnosed with high-functioning autism, which is a term that's often debated, but essentially means he can function independently in many ways, but still faces significant challenges in social communication and interaction.
And from his blog posts, we see that Kevin feels very stuck in his current situation. He desperately wants more independence, things like getting a smartphone, learning to drive, moving out, but he feels held back.
He specifically talks about being stuck with a flip phone because his parents won't let him upgrade to a smartphone.
Stuck in the dark ages.
This might seem like a small detail, but it actually represents a much bigger issue. Kevin's desire for autonomy clashing with the limits set by his parents.
It's interesting how something as simple as a phone can become such a symbol of independence and control for him. It makes you wonder, what does a smartphone represent to Kevin beyond just making calls and texting?
It's a gateway to the digital world, a world that he feels excluded from. He sees others engrossed in their smartphones, connecting with friends, shopping online, accessing information, and he even mentions that he has an old iPad mini that's basically only good for watching porn because it's too outdated for most apps. He feels technologically trapped in the past.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would be incredibly frustrating for him. And it seems his desire for control extends beyond technology. His writing is filled with anger and rage, often directed at his parents and authority figures.
He uses really strong language, calling himself a prized jackass or a punk, and describes wanting to lash out violently, often in response to feeling powerless. There's a recurring phrase he uses, flaming bag of shit. It represents everything he finds wrong with the world, and he applies it to everything from his personal frustrations to politics and social issues.
It sounds like he's carrying a lot of pain and resentment. What about his relationship with his parents? He mentioned living with his mother at...
Yes, and their relationship seems incredibly strained. He sees his mother as overprotective and controlling, constantly denying him the freedoms he desperately wants. He talks about a fight they had over dropped pasta that escalated to the point of police involvement.
Wow. Just dropped pasta. That sounds extreme.
It might seem like an overreaction to us, but for Kevin, it likely triggered feelings of being misunderstood, controlled, and disrespected. It's a glimpse into how seemingly minor events can escalate into major conflicts when there's a lack of healthy communication and understanding.
And what about his father? Does he mention it much?
He does, and it's clear there's a lot of resentment there, too. He talks about how his father got a new smartphone while denying him one, which he sees as a blatant act of hypocrisy. It seems he views his father as someone who takes advantage of government assistance while denying Kevin the support he needs.
So we have this young man who's clearly brilliant and articulate, but he's trapped in a cycle of anger and frustration, feeling misunderstood by his family and by society in general.
And this feeling of being misunderstood seems particularly amplified by his autism. He internalizes a lot of negative societal perceptions about autism, seeing it as a barrier to independence and a reason why he's treated differently.
You mentioned earlier that high-functioning autism is a debated term. Could you explain why?
It's a label that can be helpful in some ways, as it acknowledges that individuals on the spectrum can have a wide range of abilities, but it can also be problematic as it implies that there's a clear-cut distinction between high-functioning and low-functioning individuals, which isn't always the case.
Right, it's not a black and white spectrum.
Exactly. Every autistic person is unique with their own strengths and challenges. And the term high functioning can sometimes mask the very real struggles that individuals face, even if they appear to be functioning well on the surface.
So for Kevin, his autism isn't just a diagnosis. It's a fundamental part of his identity that shapes how he interacts with the world and how the world interacts with him.
Absolutely. And his blog posts provide us with a raw and unfiltered glimpse into that experience. But there's another layer to his story that adds even more complexity.
What's that?
We discover that Kevin was involved in something called the copyright strike war on YouTube. It's this whole underground world of anime fans re-uploading copyrighted content and battling each other over copyright claims.
Wait, so he was basically pirating anime?
Yeah, he admits to stealing content, but he sees himself as a veteran of this war, fighting for the right to share anime with others. He even mentions a specific user named Galathrania as an opponent.
It's fascinating how he applies this warrior mentality to something as seemingly mundane as copyright strikes on YouTube. It's almost like he's searching for a battle to fight a way to prove his worth and gain a sense of purpose.
I think you're onto something there. It seems that for Kevin, even his online activities become entangled with his desire for control recognition and a sense of belonging.
So we have this picture of Kevin as this angry, frustrated young man who feels trapped by his circumstances and his autism. But is there anything more to him? Is there any sign of vulnerability beneath all that rage?
There are actually moments in his writing where he seems to be reaching out for help. Amidst all the anger, we see glimpses of loneliness, despair, even suicidal thoughts.
He actually talks about suicide.
He does. He writes about wanting to end his life, about feeling like there's no hope for him. He also expresses a deep longing for human connection, particularly with women, and a sense of hopelessness about ever finding love.
That's heartbreaking. It sounds like he's desperately seeking connection and validation, but his struggles and his anger are pushing people away.
And what's even more tragic is that he seems to sabotage his own attempts to get help. There's an incident where his mother is on the phone with someone who might be able to offer support, and he goes apeshit, effectively ending the conversation.
That's such a difficult situation. He recognizes he needs help, but his distrust and anger make it hard for him to accept it. What does he say about mental health services?
He calls mental health professionals fucking quacks and expresses cynicism towards the system. He describes his own doctor as being overly cautious due to the COVID-19 pandemic, primarily conducting appointments virtually, which he views as cowardly and unprofessional.
So his negative experiences with healthcare are further reinforcing his belief that he's on his own, that no one really understands or cares about his struggles.
It's a heartbreaking cycle, and unfortunately, his living situation takes a dramatic turn that throws him into even deeper turmoil.
What happens?
His mother threatens to kick him out.
Wow, what triggers that?
It's not entirely clear, but it seems like a buildup of tension and Kevin's increasingly volatile behavior. He mentions her dropping a glass that he valued, and he describes it as deeply painful, saying, "A piece of me died."
This is where it gets really interesting. His reaction to the dropped glass seems completely disproportionate to the event itself. What does that tell us about him?
It highlights his intense emotional sensitivity and his difficulty processing everyday setbacks. Remember, he's on the autism spectrum, and individuals with autism often experience sensory input and emotional responses differently than neurotypical people. It's possible this seemingly minor incident shattered his already fragile sense of stability.
That makes sense. His world might feel a lot more chaotic and unpredictable than ours. So what does he do when his mother threatens to kick him out?
He panics. He doesn't know where he'll go or who he can rely on. He even contemplates staying at his workplace, the Sobeys grocery store, out of desperation. He talks about his limited options. A small room in his father's basement in Toronto, a grandfather down the street who's struggling with old age, and an aunt in Vancouver, which feels impossibly far away.
So he's facing the very real possibility of homelessness, and he's utterly terrified.
He describes feeling fucked in the ass and contemplates suicide again. The threat of losing his home, however imperfect it may be, seems to push him to the brink.
It's just heartbreaking to hear him describe his despair. He talks about wanting to bury his face deep in his pillow and make himself numb all over while sobbing. He even writes about wanting to stuff a pillow down his mouth to the point of gagging, almost like he's seeking physical pain to distract from his emotional pain.
It's a stark reminder of how deep his suffering is. And tragically, it seems he might have sabotaged a potential opportunity for help right when he needed it most.
What do you mean?
There's this incident where his mother is on the phone with someone who might have been able to offer support, and Kevin, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, goes apeshit. His outburst abruptly ends the conversation, potentially cutting off a lifeline.
It's almost like he's self-sabotaging, pushing away the very people who might be able to help him.
It's a complex situation, and it's important to remember that we're only seeing his side of the story. But it highlights the challenges of navigating mental health systems, especially for someone who's struggling with trust and communication.
So he's facing homelessness, potentially sabotaged his chance to get help, and his relationship with his mother is at a breaking point. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel for Kevin?
Well, things take an even more dramatic turn when, Kevin's mother ends up in a psychiatric ward host speaker. Wait, what? How does that happen? It seems she called 211, which is a community and social services hotline here in Canada, and expressed suicidal thoughts. This led to the police getting involved and her being hospitalized.
Wow, so now Kevin is dealing with his own mental health crisis, facing homelessness, and now his mother's in the hospital. That's incredibly heavy.
It's a lot for anyone to handle, especially a young adult with autism who already struggles with emotional regulation and social support. And it's important to remember that this situation sheds light on the often hidden struggles of families. Kevin's mother clearly has her own mental health challenges, which are likely compounded by the stress of caring for him and navigating his volatile behavior. It's a reminder that mental health issues impact everyone in the family system.
So where does Kevin go while his mother is hospitalized?
He's still barred from his mother's house, so he ends up staying at his grandfather's place. It's a temporary solution, but it's clear he feels lost and uncertain about the future. His reaction to his mother's hospitalization is a bit ambiguous. He expresses concern for her, but also resentment. He calls her kind of sick in the head and seems frustrated that her actions are adding to his own instability.
It sounds like he's grappling with a lot of conflicting emotions. He cares about his mother, but he's also angry at her for, in his view, abandoning him during his own time of need.
Exactly. It's a complicated situation, and it's important to avoid judging his reaction. He's a young man struggling to cope with intense emotions and a lack of support. He even calls the mental health system a frickin' shit show and criticizes its lack of adequate support and resources.
Okay, so we have this perfect storm brewing. Kevin's mental health is fragile, his mother's in crisis, and he's feeling failed by the systems that are supposed to help. Does it get any better for him?
There's a brief period where he reconciles with his mother and returns home, but it's short-lived. They have another explosive argument, and once again the police are called.
What triggers this fight? Another dropped glass incident.
You'd think they'd be more careful with glassware at this point, but this time it's actually triggered by his mother accidentally dropping some pasta on the floor.
Pasta again? Seriously?
I know it seems absurd. But remember, we're talking about a young man with autism who experiences the world differently. He describes being in a bitchy mood that day, frustrated with things like Walmart bad drivers and a general feeling of being fucked in the ass by the world. The dropped pasta seems to be the final straw that pushes him over the edge.
It's like his emotional regulation circuits are overloaded, and even the smallest things can trigger an explosive reaction.
That's a good way to put it. And during this outburst, he makes a really revealing statement. He screams that he's utterly sick and tired of being autistic.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. What do you make of that statement?
It highlights the internalized stigma he carries about his autism. He sees it as the root of his problems, the reason he can't control his emotions, the reason he's different and struggles to fit in. He even says, if I was offered a day without autism, I would take it. It's a heartbreaking statement that reflects the societal pressures and negative perceptions that can deeply impact an individual's self-worth, especially for someone who's already marginalized.
It's a reminder that autism isn't something you can just switch on and off.
Yeah.
It's an integral part of who he is. And it sounds like his mother is reaching her breaking point, too.
Yes. She describes feeling overwhelmed and on the verge of leaving him for good. She tries to seek support from various mental health services, but Kevin's outbursts and distrust make it difficult to find the right kind of help.
So they're both trapped in this incredibly difficult situation, each struggling in their own way. It's like a heartbreaking dance of dysfunction. What happens next?
Facing the very real threat of being kicked out again, Kevin agrees to stay at a supportive housing facility for a few nights.
So this is a temporary solution to give them some space and maybe explore alternative living arrangements for Kevin.
Exactly. And it's a huge step for Kevin considering how much he values his routines and how attached he is to his home environment. He describes his anxiety about going to this new place saying, "My nerves are going nuts as it is the first time I have ever lived on my own."
I can only imagine how overwhelming that must feel for him.
He details his experience at the facility, mentioning things like not liking the TV, having to call staff before leaving, and a general feeling of being confined and controlled. He also struggles with some of the staff members using offensive language to describe them and complaining about their policies and procedures.
It sounds like his difficulty adapting to new environments and his tendency to lash out when frustrated are rearing their heads again.
Unfortunately, yes. But it's important to remember that his behavior, while inappropriate, is often a symptom of his underlying struggles. He also mentions missing things like Monday Night Raw and the Stanley Cup Finals, which highlights how important his familiar routines and interests are to his sense of stability.
It makes sense. Disruptions to routine can be incredibly distressing for people on the autism spectrum.
His time at the facility is a mix of highs and lows. He enjoys going to the gym with his mother and eating at McDonald's, but he also acts out impulsively, even punching out a fire alarm control panel at Union Station, which leaves him with a bloody pinky.
It's like he's constantly testing boundaries, pushing back against the rules and restrictions that he feels are being imposed on him.
It's a way of asserting his need for control in an environment that feels foreign and restrictive. And sadly, upon returning home from the facility, his emotional state seems to deteriorate even further.
How so?
He expresses deep cynicism about life, comparing it to a game that he's destined to lose. He grapples with suicidal thoughts, again describing death as painless and a way to escape his suffering. He even reflects on his past mistakes, acknowledging the pain he's caused others, especially his mother.
There's a flicker of self-awareness there, a glimpse of remorse, but it sounds like it's quickly overshadowed by despair.
Yes. He describes feeling like the world is trying to run him off the road to a better life and that people are mocking him for his struggles. His feelings of isolation and rejection are palpable, and his anger spills over into some very disturbing fantasies.
What kind of fantasies?
He writes about wanting to drown a Japanese woman, feeling her up as she struggles for breath, and forcing her to become his slave.
Wow, that's really dark.
It's incredibly disturbing, and it's crucial to take these expressions seriously, but it's also important to try and understand the psychology behind them.
What do you think these fantasies reveal about him?
They're likely a manifestation of his unmet desires for intimacy, control, and validation. He's projecting his anger and frustration onto a fictionalized object of desire, seeking a twisted sense of power and fulfillment that he desperately lacks in his real life.
It's like he's creating a fantasy world where he can have complete control and dominance, a stark contrast to his reality where he feels powerless and misunderstood.
Exactly. And this darkness seeps into other areas of his life as well. He expresses a fascination with suffering and death, describing gruesome scenarios and finding solace in heavy metal music that evokes these themes.
It's like he's drawn to the macabre, finding a strange sense of comfort in darkness and despair. But you mentioned earlier that amidst all this darkness, there are also glimpses of vulnerability. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, despite all the anger and disturbing imagery, Kevin also reveals a surprising longing for connection and intimacy. He writes about wanting to cuddle with a woman, to feel her warmth and the softness of her skin. He describes yearning to smell her perfume and to feel her heartbeat against his chest.
So beneath all the rage and aggression, there's a basic human need for love and affection. But it seems like he's struggling to express those needs in a healthy way.
Absolutely. His desires are often expressed in crude or inappropriate ways, reflecting his lack of experience and his tendency to objectify women. He also idealizes Japanese women, likely influenced by his immersion in anime and Japanese culture, viewing them as exotic and submissive.
It's like he's created this fantasy world where he can envision himself as desirable and worthy of love. But it's a world that's detached from reality and potentially harmful if it becomes obsessive.
You're right. It's a delicate balance. His yearning for connection is genuine, but his distorted perceptions and lack of social skills create significant barriers to achieving healthy intimacy.
So he's craving intimacy, but struggling to find it. And it seems like his family isn't providing the support he needs in this area either.
His desire for intimacy extends beyond just romantic relationships. He expresses a longing for a pet, specifically a Siberian husky. He describes wanting to pat and cuddle the dog, finding comfort in its wolf-like appearance, and imagining the companionship it would provide.
Oh, that's sweet. But I'm guessing his parents aren't keen on the idea.
You guessed it. They refused to allow him to get a pet, believing he wouldn't neglect or abuse it.
That must be frustrating for him. It's like another example of his parents not trusting him to be responsible, further reinforcing his feelings of being infantilized and denied the freedoms he craves.
Exactly. And this dynamic comes to a head when he discovers that his father has a new smartphone while he's still stuck with his outdated flip phone.
Oh, I bet that didn't go over well.
He's enraged by this perceived hypocrisy. He sees it as another example of his parents denying him the freedoms and privileges they readily grant themselves. He argues that he can easily afford a smartphone with his earnings from his part-time job and government assistance, but his parents stand firm in their refusal.
It sounds like this smartphone has become a symbol of everything he's fighting for: autonomy, independence, and recognition as an adult.
It represents his desire to participate in the digital world, to connect with others on his own terms, and to break free from the restrictions he feels are unjustly imposed on him. And his resentment towards his father seems to spill over into other areas as well.
How so?
He paints a rather unflattering picture of his father, describing him as a lazy bum who sits around his basement room collecting welfare and only venturing out for fast food or cigarettes.
It's like he's judging his father for the very things he fears, becoming himself trapped in a cycle of poverty and stagnation.
It's a classic case of projection. He sees his father as a negative role model and wants to distance himself from that path. But at the same time, he's struggling to find his own way, his own sense of purpose and direction.
This tension between his desire for independence and his fear of becoming like his father is really fascinating. It's like he's caught between two worlds and he's not sure which one he belongs to. What about his desire for romantic relationships? Does that come up in his writing?
It does, and it's clear he longs for a girlfriend for the experience of intimacy and connection. But his social anxieties and limited opportunities create significant barriers. He expresses his desires in often crude and objectifying ways, which likely stems from his lack of experience and his distorted perceptions of women shaped by his immersion in anime.
It sounds like his online world and his real world are colliding in some pretty unhealthy ways.
Exactly. His struggles with social interaction are apparent in his descriptions of past attempts to connect with women. He recounts experiences of rejection and mockery which have fueled his anxieties and reinforced his belief that he's undesirable and unworthy of love.
It's a vicious cycle. His lack of success in real-life interactions likely drives him further into his online world, where he can create a fantasy version of himself that feels more powerful and in control.
That's a very insightful observation. And speaking of his online world, let's dive into that a bit more, because it seems Kevin's online activities play a significant role in shaping his thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
Okay, let's unplug and delve into the digital side of Kevin's life.
Kevin's online activities play a significant role in shaping his thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
Yeah, it's like his digital footprint is a window into his soul.
Kevin spends countless hours on his laptop immersing himself in anime pornography and online communities where he can interact with others, albeit often anonymously, and in ways that reflect his darker impulses.
So his online world becomes this double-edged sword. It provides a sense of escape and connection, but it also allows him to indulge in fantasies and behaviors that wouldn't be acceptable in the real world.
Precisely, he describes using his laptop to numb himself, seeking distraction from his real-life struggles. But it's not just passive consumption. He also actively engages in online conflicts, using his John Marston persona to lash out at critics and engage in heated arguments.
That's interesting. He creates this alternate identity to express his rage and cynicism without filter. What do you think motivates this behavior?
It seems to provide him with a sense of power and control that he desperately lacks in his offline life. He relishes the anonymity and the ability to express himself without consequences, often resorting to offensive language and personal attacks.
It's like he's found a way to channel his anger and frustration into a virtual battlefield where he can feel like he's winning, even if it's at the expense of others.
You're right. It's a way of seeking validation and attention, even if it's negative, as a way to combat his feelings of insignificance and invisibility.
It's a reminder of the potential for the internet to become a breeding ground for negativity, aggression, and harmful behavior, especially for individuals who are already struggling with mental health challenges.
Absolutely. And it highlights the need for promoting responsible online conduct and addressing the underlying issues that can contribute to these destructive patterns.
So Kevin's online world is this complex mix of escape, connection, and aggression. It allows him to be both vulnerable and vicious, to seek solace and to inflict pain. What other themes emerge from his online writings?
Well, in addition to his darker impulses, we also see Kevin grappling with his evolving sense of self and his place in the world both online and offline. He expresses frustration with his limited social opportunities, blaming his autism for his social awkwardness and feeling like an outcast.
It's like he's internalized all the negative stereotypes about autism, seeing it as a barrier to happiness and fulfillment.
Yes, and this internalized stigma fuels his cynicism and distrust of others, especially those he perceives as normal or successful. He longs for acceptance and validation, but his experiences have left him feeling deeply cynical and distrustful of the world around him.
It's a heartbreaking cycle. His negative experiences reinforce his negative beliefs, pushing him further into isolation.
And this cynicism extends to his view of institutions and systems. He criticizes mental health services, the police, and the Canadian government, believing they are all failing him and others who are struggling.
It's like he sees the world as this rigged game where he's destined to lose no matter how hard he tries.
His distrust of authority figures is deeply ingrained, stemming from his experiences with his parents, healthcare providers, and law enforcement. He feels trapped in a system that doesn't understand or care about his needs, further fueling his desire to rebel and lash out.
So his anger and frustration aren't just personal. They're also directed at the systems and institutions that he believes are perpetuating his suffering.
Exactly. He sees injustice everywhere he looks, and he feels powerless to change it. And this sense of powerlessness manifests in some truly disturbing fantasies.
You're referring to the fantasies about violence and control, particularly towards women.
Yes, those fantasies are incredibly disturbing and should not be taken lightly. But it's important to remember that they are likely a manifestation of his unmet desires for intimacy, control, and validation. He's projecting his anger and frustration onto a fictionalized object of desire, seeking a twisted sense of power and fulfillment that he desperately lacks in his real life.
It's a reminder that fantasy and reality can become dangerously intertwined, especially for someone who's struggling with mental health issues and a distorted sense of self.
You're right, and it's important to note that these fantasies are not uncommon, but they can become problematic if they become obsessive or interfere with healthy relationships and interactions.
So what can we learn from Kevin's online world?
It reveals a complex interplay between vulnerability, aggression, escapism, and a yearning for connection. It highlights the potential for the internet to be both a source of support and a catalyst for harm.
It's like a microcosm of the broader societal debate surrounding the impact of technology on mental health, social interaction, and the very nature of identity.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that the digital world, just like the real world, is full of complexities and contradictions. But it's also a place where we can find glimpses of humanity even in the darkest of corners.
Well, let's move beyond Kevin's digital life and explore what his blog reveals about his everyday experiences, his interests, and his relationships with the people in his life.
One thing that jumps out is his description of his job at Sobeys. He talks about his duties as a produce clerk and expresses frustration with the monotony and low pay. He clearly longs for a more fulfilling and financially rewarding career, but he feels limited by his lack of education, social anxieties, and his parents' lack of support.
It's like he's stuck in this dead-end job that reinforces his feelings of being trapped and undervalued.
It's certainly contributing to his sense of frustration and hopelessness, but his blog also reveals a passionate side to him. He describes his love for heavy metal music, finding solace in its intensity and aggression. He talks about feeling his lungs vibrate when he listens to bands like Sabaton, Nightwish, X Japan, and Korpiklani, experiencing the music as a physical and emotional release.
It sounds like music is a powerful coping mechanism for him, a way to channel his emotions and connect with something larger than himself.
You're right. This intense connection to music is a common way for people to cope with emotional distress. It can provide comfort, catharsis, and a sense of belonging.
And it's interesting that his musical preferences align with some of his other interests. He's drawn to music that reflects his own internal struggles, finding solace in the expression of raw emotion and aggression. And his love for heavy metal also connects to his fascination with Japanese culture.
Absolutely. He specifically mentions the band X Japan, a pioneering Japanese heavy metal group known for their theatrical performances and intensely emotional music. This crossover between his musical tastes and his cultural interests highlights the interconnectedness of his passions and how they inform his worldview.
It's like he's creating a tapestry of meaning out of his interests, weaving together threads of music, culture, and personal experience.
It's a beautiful way to put it, and there's another unexpected interest that provides a glimpse into his more lighthearted side. He reveals a surprising love for professional wrestling, particularly WWE.
Really? That's not what I expected.
I know it's an interesting juxtaposition to his darker interests, but it makes sense when you consider what wrestling represents. Spectacle, larger-than-life characters, in a world where good and evil battle it out in a highly stylized and dramatic way.
It's like a form of escapism that allows him to disconnect from his own struggles and immerse himself in a world of fantasy and entertainment.
Precisely, he expresses admiration for wrestlers like Cody Rhodes and Natalya, recounting stories of their kindness and generosity towards fans. It seems he's drawn to their strength, resilience, and compassion.
It's almost like he's looking for role models, figures who embody the qualities he admires, but struggles to embody himself.
I think that's a very astute observation. He also reveals a fascination with the spectacle and theatricality of wrestling, finding entertainment in its over-the-top characters and storylines.
It's like he's drawn to the drama and the heightened emotions, even if he knows it's all staged.
Exactly. And this appreciation for the performative aspects of wrestling suggests a desire for escape and a fascination with larger-than-life figures who embody extremes of emotion and behavior.
It's a reminder that even amidst his struggles, Kevin has the capacity for joy, humor, and connection. His interests are more than just distractions. They're windows into his personality, his values, and his yearning for a world that feels more vibrant and meaningful than his current reality.
You've hit the nail on the head. These seemingly disparate interests actually reveal a lot about his inner world, his need for control, his search for belonging, and his desire for a life that feels less mundane and more heroic.
Well, let's shift our focus to Kevin's personal history and what his blog reveals about his family dynamics, his childhood experiences, and the events that have shaped his current outlook on life.
Okay, let's rewind the tape and delve into Kevin's past.
One of the things that stands out to me is how much Kevin talks about his childhood, specifically the different schools he attended in the Thornhill area.
He mentions Westminster Public School, Wilshire Elementary School, Rosedale Heights Public School, and Willowbrook Public School, just to name a few. He also talks about attending Thornley Secondary School and participating in the PEAK program, a specialized program for students with learning disabilities.
So he's giving us these specific details about his educational journey. Why do you think he's sharing this information?
I think it provides important context for his current struggles by understanding his past experiences with education, social interaction, and family dynamics. We can better grasp the root of his anger, his isolation, and his distorted perceptions of the world.
It's like he's trying to piece together the puzzle of his own life, understanding how he became the person he is today.
Exactly. And one of the most significant pieces of this puzzle seems to be his relationship with his father. He describes his father as distant, controlling, and prone to violence. He recounts incidents of physical and emotional abuse, describing feeling threatened and belittled by his father.
It's clear these experiences have left deep scars. It makes sense that he would struggle with trust authority and emotional regulation if he grew up in an environment where he felt unsafe and unloved.
His relationship with his mother is more complex. He describes her as both loving and overprotective, acknowledging her efforts to care for him and support his needs, but also resenting her control and her tendency to infantilize him.
This push and pull between dependence and a desire for autonomy is a recurring theme in his writing. It's like he wants to be both cared for and independent, which creates a lot of tension, especially within his family dynamics.
Absolutely. He's struggling to establish a healthy sense of self, and his family relationships seem to be both a source of support and a source of frustration.
What other personal details does he share?
He talks about his physical appearance, describing himself as overweight and struggling with psoriasis. He expresses dissatisfaction with his body image, feeling self-conscious about his weight and the appearance of his skin.
It's like his self-loathing extends beyond his mind and into his physical being.
These insecurities contribute to his overall sense of self-loathing and fuel his desire for escape and validation. He even fantasizes about transforming his body, envisioning himself as muscular and attractive. It's a common coping mechanism to idealize a version of oneself that feels more acceptable and desirable.
His preoccupation with his physical appearance also highlights the societal pressures and unrealistic beauty standards that can impact an individual's self-esteem, particularly those who are already marginalized or struggling with mental health issues.
You're right, he's internalized these cultural messages about what it means to be attractive and worthy, and he judges himself harshly for not measuring up.
So we're starting to see a more complete picture of Kevin. He's not just this angry, ranting voice online. He's a complex individual with a history of trauma insecurities and a deep longing for connection and belonging.
And his blog posts, while often disturbing and offensive, offer us a unique and valuable window into his world, allowing us to understand his struggles, his desires, and the forces that have shaped him into the person he is today.
But it's not just his personal experiences that shape his worldview. He also spends a lot of time reflecting on broader societal issues, politics, and his own philosophical musings. Let's explore those aspects of his writing in more detail.
Let's step back and see how Kevin views the world around him.
One of the things that struck me is how cynical and pessimistic Kevin's worldview often seems. He frequently expresses anger and frustration towards various groups and individuals, using derogatory language and making sweeping generalizations.
You're right. He seems to see the world through a lens of negativity, attributing malicious intent to those he disagrees with, and seeing conspiracies lurking around every corner.
He often targets jabronis,
Yeah.
which seems to be his catch-all term for anyone he perceives as foolish, arrogant, or privileged.
His use of this term reflects his feelings of resentment and alienation, a sense that he's constantly being overlooked, dismissed, or taken advantage of by those in positions of power or privilege.
It's like he's created this us versus them mentality where he sees himself as the underdog fighting against the system that's rigged against him.
That's a good way to put it. He seems to have a deep-seated belief that the world is fundamentally unfair and that people are inherently selfish and untrustworthy.
And this cynicism extends to his views on specific groups and behaviors. He expresses a particular dislike for cyclists, recounting incidents where he's nearly been hit by them, and expressing a desire to inflict violence upon them.
His violent fantasies, while disturbing, are likely a manifestation of his broader frustration with the world and his tendency to project his anger onto those he perceives as different or threatening. It's important to remember that his behavior, while unacceptable, is often a symptom of his underlying struggles.
It's like his anger is this overflowing pot, and anyone who bumps into him even accidentally gets scalded.
That's a very vivid analogy. And his anger isn't limited to cyclists. He also expresses disdain for people who smoke, criticizing his parents for their smoking habits, and fantasizing about enacting policies that would ban smoking altogether.
His strong opinions on smoking likely reflect his anxieties about his own health and his desire for control over his surroundings. He seems to have a very black and white view of the world, where things are either right or wrong, good or bad, with little room for nuance or gray areas.
His hostility towards smokers also reveals a judgmental and intolerant streak in his personality, a tendency to view those who engage in behaviors he disapproves of as morally inferior.
So he's quick to judge and condemn those who don't align with his values, and it seems like his anger and frustration aren't just directed at individuals, they're also aimed at institutions and systems.
You're absolutely right. He frequently expresses frustration with government policies and societal norms, believing they are rigged against him and others like him.
He's particularly critical of the Canadian government, especially Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for policies he perceives as unfair or detrimental to his well-being.
He sees himself as a victim of a system that's designed to benefit those in power at the expense of the vulnerable.
His writing often takes on a conspiratorial tone, as he suspects hidden agendas and malicious intent behind everyday events and interactions. It's like he's constantly looking for evidence to confirm his belief that the world is out to get him.
This tendency toward paranoia likely stems from his experiences with betrayal, rejection, and a lack of trust in those around him.
So his cynicism isn't just a personality trait. It's a defense mechanism, a way of protecting himself from further disappointment and hurt.
I think you're right, and while his cynicism is understandable given his struggles, it also prevents him from forming healthy relationships and engaging constructively with the world. His tendency to view others with suspicion and hostility creates barriers to connection and reinforces his feelings of isolation and alienation.
It's a vicious cycle. His distrust pushes people away, which further confirms his belief that the world is a hostile and untrustworthy place.
And this cynicism extends to his views on various societal issues. He expresses disgust towards individuals who claim military service, falsely viewing them as disrespectful and dishonorable. He criticizes their behavior as a betrayal of those who have genuinely served and sacrificed for their country.
These strong opinions likely reflect his admiration for those who have served in the military, perhaps stemming from his own desire for recognition and validation. He even fantasizes about joining the military himself, envisioning himself as a hero who is willing to fight for his country and earn the respect he craves.
It's like he's searching for a cause to believe in, a way to prove his worth and find meaning in a world that feels increasingly meaningless to him.
And his sense of justice doesn't stop there. He also expresses outrage towards individuals who illegally park in handicap spots, viewing them as selfish and entitled. He criticizes their behavior as a disregard for the needs of those with disabilities, likely stemming from his own experiences with feeling marginalized and overlooked.
It's another example of his tendency toward black and white thinking. He sees the world in terms of good versus evil, right versus wrong, with little room for nuance or understanding.
And it seems his anger isn't limited to offline transgressions. He's equally enraged by online scams, particularly those who prey on vulnerable people seeking love or companionship.
He criticizes their behavior as cruel and manipulative, highlighting the emotional toll that these scams can take on their victims.
Yeah.
His anger toward these scammers likely stems from his own longing for connection and his fear of being exploited or betrayed.
So his outrage isn't just about abstract principles, it's personal. He's projecting his own fears and vulnerabilities onto these situations, seeing them as reflections of the injustices he believes he's experienced.
Exactly, and it highlights the importance of understanding the context of his anger. It's not just random rage, it's rooted in his experiences, his perceptions, and his deep-seated belief that the world is a hostile and unfair place.
Well, let's dive a bit deeper into Kevin's relationship with technology. We've talked about his frustration with his outdated flip phone and his desire for a smartphone, but what other insights do his blog posts offer about his views on technology?
Kevin's relationship with technology is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, he recognizes its potential to connect people, provide entertainment, and access information. He marvels at the capabilities of smartphones, computers, and the internet. But on the other hand, he expresses cynicism towards the ways in which technology is often used, criticizing its role in promoting superficiality, consumerism, and social isolation.
It's like he sees both the promise and the peril of technology. He's drawn to its possibilities, but also wary of its potential to distract, manipulate, and disconnect us from what truly matters.
Exactly. He's particularly frustrated with his parents' restrictions on his access to technology, feeling infantilized and denied the freedoms that others his age take for granted. His frustration with his outdated flip phone and his inability to purchase a smartphone becomes a symbol of his broader power struggle with his parents and his longing for autonomy.
It's like he sees technology as a gateway to independence, connection, and a sense of belonging in the modern world. But his parents' control over his access to it reinforces his feelings of being trapped and powerless.
His experiences also highlight the potential downsides of technology, particularly its ability to amplify negative emotions, promote unhealthy habits, and contribute to feelings of isolation and disconnect.
He talks about how he uses his laptop to numb himself, seeking distraction from his real-life struggles and finding temporary relief in the digital world. But it's clear that this excessive reliance on technology is exacerbating his problems rather than solving them.
Absolutely. His immersion in the online world allows him to escape his reality, but it also prevents him from developing the coping mechanisms and social skills he needs to thrive in the offline world.
His struggles with his computer also highlight his lack of technical expertise and his difficulty navigating the complexities of the digital world. He seems to lack the knowledge and resources to effectively troubleshoot problems and optimize his device's performance.
This technological frustration adds to his overall sense of helplessness and fuels his resentment towards those he perceives as more tech-savvy or privileged. It's another example of how technology, while offering potential for empowerment, can also create new forms of inequality and exclusion.
So Kevin's complex relationship with technology reflects the broader societal debate surrounding its impact on our lives, both positive and negative.
It raises important questions about the balance between embracing technological advancements and preserving human connection, privacy, and well-being.
Well, in addition to his views on technology, Kevin's blog also reveals a surprising interest in local history and geography. He shares anecdotes about familiar landmarks and recounts childhood memories of visiting places like the Promenade Mall, the CN Tower, and Niagara Falls, expressing a mix of nostalgia, amusement, and anxiety about these locations.
His memories of these places offer a glimpse into his past, highlighting the ways in which his experiences have shaped his current worldview. He even reveals a fear of heights, describing feeling terrified while ascending the CN Tower and dreading driving over bridges. This phobia, while common, adds to his overall sense of anxiety and limits his ability to fully experience the world around him.
It's interesting how these seemingly mundane details about his hometown and his childhood experiences can reveal so much about his inner world.
You're right, it shows us how his past is intertwined with his present, shaping his fears, his anxieties, and his perception of the world around him. He also mentions a desire to visit Japan one day, but his fear of flying presents a significant obstacle.
That's a classic example of how phobias can limit our experiences and prevent us from pursuing our dreams. It's also a bit ironic considering how much he romanticizes Japanese culture through anime.
Absolutely. It highlights the disconnect between his idealized fantasies and the limitations of his reality.
So he's drawn to this faraway land, but terrified to actually experience it firsthand. It's like his anxieties are holding him captive, keeping him tethered to his familiar, albeit unsatisfying routines.
And speaking of familiar routines, he talks a lot about his neighborhood in Thornhill, mentioning landmarks like the William Lyon Mackenzie Housing Cooperative where he lives with his mother.
It's like he's creating a mental map of his world, outlining the boundaries of his existence.
You're right, he's defining his space, his territory, a sense of belonging within a very specific geographic location, and it's not always a positive relationship. He expresses frustration with the co-op's management, criticizing their neglect of the property and their lack of responsiveness to his concerns.
It's another example of his distrust of authority figures and his belief that institutions are often corrupt or incompetent. He seems to see neglect and indifference everywhere he looks.
His cynicism is pervasive, but amidst these complaints, we also see glimpses of his yearning for connection, even within this seemingly impersonal housing complex. He recounts stories about his father's past, highlighting his encounters with famous figures like Wayne Gretzky, Roddy Piper, and Bret Hart.
It's interesting that he chooses to share these anecdotes. What do you think they reveal about him?
It shows us how he's trying to make sense of his family history, to find some thread of meaning or significance within a narrative that often feels chaotic and disappointing. He seems to take pride in his father's connections to these celebrities, even as he criticizes his father's lifestyle choices and personal failings.
It's a complicated relationship. He wants to both admire and reject his father, to distance himself from his perceived flaws, while also clinging to any shred of accomplishment or recognition.
Exactly. It's a classic example of the ambivalent feelings many people have towards their parents, especially those who have experienced difficult or abusive childhoods.
And this tension between admiration and resentment seems to play out in many of his relationships, both with individuals and institutions. He wants to believe in something bigger than himself, something that offers him a sense of purpose and belonging. But he's constantly being let down, which fuels his cynicism and his anger.
His blog posts are filled with examples of these disappointments and betrayals, whether it's his parents' refusal to let him get a smartphone, his negative experiences with mental health services, or his encounters with reckless drivers who seem to disregard his safety.
Speaking of drivers, he rants quite a bit about traffic laws and the behavior of other drivers, often recounting incidents where he's felt endangered or disrespected on the road.
His anxieties about safety and control seem to be heightened when he's behind the wheel. Or even just a passenger, he feels vulnerable and powerless in the face of reckless or inconsiderate driving.
It's like the unpredictability of traffic triggers his sense of being fucked in the ass by the world, reinforcing his belief that chaos and injustice reigns supreme.
And his anger spills over into fantasies of revenge, envisioning himself as a vigilante who punishes those who break the rules.
It's like he's creating a fantasy world where he has the power to enforce justice and control the chaos that surrounds him.
It's a way of compensating for his feelings of powerlessness in the real world.
And it's not just bad drivers that trigger his rage. He also expresses annoyance with spam emails, viewing them as an invasion of his privacy and a symbol of the intrusive nature of technology.
He describes receiving numerous unsolicited emails from various companies and organizations expressing frustration with their persistence and their attempts to manipulate him into purchasing products or services.
It's like he sees spam as a metaphor for the way the world is constantly trying to sell him something, to bombard him with information he doesn't want, and to control his choices.
His anger towards spam reflects his broader sense of being bombarded with unwanted information and his desire for control over his digital environment.
And this frustration with being controlled extends to his experiences with public transportation. He's particularly critical of the TTC Toronto's public transit system.
He recounts negative experiences with bus drivers complaining about their rudeness and disregard for passenger safety. He also criticizes the TTC's handling of smoking and drug use on its vehicles, believing they are not doing enough to address these issues.
It's like he's hyper-aware of any behavior that disrupts his sense of order and control, and he's quick to judge and condemn those who violate his personal code of conduct.
His anxieties about safety and hygiene seem to be amplified in these public spaces, where he feels surrounded by unpredictable and potentially threatening individuals.
And this sense of being threatened both physically and emotionally seems to be a recurring theme in his writing. He talks about feeling targeted because of his autism, experiencing discrimination, and encountering people who misunderstand or mock his differences.
It's heartbreaking to hear him describe these experiences. It highlights the very real challenges faced by individuals with autism in navigating a world that isn't always welcoming or accommodating to their needs.
And sadly, this sense of being marginalized and misunderstood seems to extend to his interactions with the mental health system. He expresses frustration with the accessibility and effectiveness of services in his area, describing feeling ignored and dismissed by mental health professionals.
He criticizes the bureaucratic hurdles, the long wait times, and the impersonal nature of many mental health services. He feels like he's being treated like a number, a diagnosis, rather than a human being with complex needs and experiences.
His distrust of mental health professionals is palpable. He believes they are more interested in collecting fees than genuinely helping him, and his negative experiences with therapists and psychiatrists have only reinforced his belief that the system is rigged against him.
It's a tragic situation. He desperately needs support, but his past experiences have left him feeling deeply cynical and suspicious of the very people who are supposed to help him.
It's like he's caught in a catch-22. He needs help, but he doesn't trust those who offer it. And this distrust prevents him from engaging in the therapeutic process that could potentially help him heal and grow.
His frustration with the medicalization of mental illness is also understandable. He criticizes the tendency of mental health professionals to focus on diagnosing and labeling him rather than providing practical solutions to his problems. He wants to be seen as an individual, not just a collection of symptoms.
And this frustration extends to his views on political correctness and social justice movements. He sees them as forms of censorship that restrict his freedom of expression and prevent honest dialogue.
He criticizes what he perceives as a culture of hypersensitivity and offense-taking, believing that it stifles open discussion and creates a climate of fear and conformity.
It's like he feels silenced, like his voice, however offensive or controversial, is being shut down by a culture that prioritizes politeness over honesty.
His disdain for social justice movements is particularly interesting. He sees them as driven by hypocrisy and a desire for power rather than genuine concern for marginalized groups. This cynicism likely stems from his own experiences with feeling marginalized and misunderstood. He sees hypocrisy in others because he feels like he's been a victim of it himself.
So his anger and frustration are often rooted in his own experiences of pain and injustice. It's like he's projecting his own wounds onto the world, seeing enemies and betrayals everywhere he looks.
And this tendency towards projection manifests in some of his more disturbing interests. He reveals a fascination with true crime, particularly stories involving serial killers and violent offenders.
He expresses admiration for their intelligence, cunning, and ability to evade capture. It's a bit unsettling, to say the least.
It's definitely concerning. His interest in true crime, while not inherently problematic, raises questions about his own potential for violence and his lack of empathy for victims.
It's like he's romanticizing these criminals, seeing them as powerful figures who operate outside the constraints of conventional morality. It's a dangerous and distorted view of the world, especially for someone who's already struggling with anger and impulsivity.
It's crucial to address these unhealthy fascinations and provide him with support to develop healthier coping mechanisms and a more nuanced understanding of crime and its consequences.
So while his interest in true crime might seem like just another quirky detail about Kevin, it actually reveals a lot about his inner world and his potential for harm. It's a reminder that we can't just dismiss his words as harmless rants. We need to take them seriously and try to understand the underlying motivations and the potential risks involved.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that Kevin's blog posts are just one piece of the puzzle. They offer us a glimpse into his mind, but they don't tell us the whole story. There's a lot more to him than what we see on the surface.
So what are some of the other facets of Kevin's personality and his experiences that emerge from his blog?
Well, despite his frustration with his inability to obtain a driver's license, blaming his parents for their refusal to allow him to learn to drive, he expresses a strong desire for freedom and mobility. He argues that his autism should not prevent him from driving, citing statistics about autistic individuals who have successfully obtained their licenses.
It's like he sees driving as a symbol of independence and adulthood, a way to break free from the constraints of his current life and explore the world on his own terms.
Exactly. He longs for the autonomy and the sense of agency that comes with being behind the wheel, but his parents' concerns about his safety, coupled with his own anxieties and emotional volatility, create a significant barrier to achieving this goal.
It's another example of the tension between his yearning for independence and the limitations imposed by his circumstances and his own challenges, and this sense of being trapped extends beyond just driving. He also expresses frustration with the high cost of living in the Greater Toronto area, feeling priced out of the housing market, and struggling to make ends meet on his limited income.
His financial anxieties add to his overall stress and contribute to his negative outlook on life. He feels trapped by his circumstances, believing that he is destined to remain poor and dependent on others.
It's like he's facing this double bind. He wants to be independent, but he lacks the resources and the support to achieve that goal. And this frustration fuels his resentment toward those he perceives as wealthier or more fortunate.
He sees injustice in the economic disparities that surround him, believing that the system is rigged against those who are struggling.
It's a common sentiment among those who feel left behind, forgotten by a society that prioritizes wealth and status over compassion and empathy.
And amidst these struggles, Kevin reveals a yearning for something more, a desire to break free from the mundane and achieve a sense of recognition and significance. He even expresses a desire for fame, fantasizing about becoming a YouTube celebrity or a notorious figure known for his controversial opinions and outrageous behavior.
It's interesting that he sees fame as a potential path to fulfillment. What do you think motivates this aspiration?
It likely stems from his feelings of inadequacy and his desire to be seen and validated by others. He feels invisible and insignificant in his everyday life, and he seeks to compensate for these feelings by creating a persona that is shocking, outrageous, and impossible to ignore.
It's like he's trying to create a larger-than-life version of himself, one that can command attention and demand respect.
His desire for fame also reflects his fascination with power and control. He envisions himself using his platform to influence others and shape public opinion, wielding his words as weapons to fight against the injustices he perceives in the world.
It's a dangerous fantasy, but it's also a testament to his creativity, his intelligence, and his deep-seated desire to make a difference, even if it's through negative attention.
And this darkness manifests in other ways as well. He expresses a fascination with death and dying, describing gruesome scenarios and pondering the afterlife.
These morbid interests, while disturbing, are likely a manifestation of his depression and his struggle to find meaning and purpose in his life.
He seems to be grappling with existential questions, searching for answers to life's big mysteries, and struggling to cope with the inevitability of his own mortality.
It's a reminder that behind the anger, the cynicism, and the disturbing fantasies, there's a young man who is hurting, who is lost, and who is desperately searching for a way to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and meaningless.
And amidst this darkness, we see flickers of light, glimpses of hope and humanity. He reveals a surprising appreciation for nature, describing his desire to walk along a long stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, imagining himself escaping the confines of his suburban life and connecting with the vastness of the natural world.
It's like he's yearning for a sense of peace and tranquility, a way to escape the noise and chaos of his everyday life and find solace in the simplicity and beauty of nature.
He also expresses a fascination with animals, particularly dogs, envisioning himself forming a deep bond with a canine companion. This desire for a pet likely stems from his longing for unconditional love and companionship, something he feels is lacking in his human relationships.
It's a heartwarming image to think of this angry, cynical young man finding comfort and connection in the love of a furry friend.
It reminds us that even those who seem hardened and closed off have a capacity for tenderness and affection.
And this capacity for tenderness extends to his appreciation for classic cars, particularly vintage models that evoke a sense of nostalgia and simpler times. This interest in cars likely stems from his desire for freedom and escape as he imagines himself cruising down open roads, leaving behind the confines of his suburban life.
He also appreciates the beauty and craftsmanship of these vintage vehicles, finding solace in their timeless design and enduring appeal. It's like he's seeking beauty and meaning in unexpected places, finding moments of joy and connection amidst the bleakness of his everyday existence.
So even though his blog posts are often filled with anger, despair, and disturbing fantasies, we also see glimpses of his humanity, his vulnerability, and his longing for a life that feels more authentic and fulfilling.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Kevin's story is not unique. There are countless individuals out there who are struggling with similar challenges, facing mental health issues, societal pressures, and a lack of support and understanding.
This blog post offers us a valuable window into the often hidden struggles of those who are marginalized, misunderstood, and yearning for connection.
By delving into Kevin's world, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of the human experience, the challenges of mental illness, and the importance of empathy and compassion in a world that can often feel cold and indifferent.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the world of Kevin Stewart, what are some of the key takeaways that we can carry with us?
Kevin's story is a powerful reminder that there are countless individuals struggling with unseen challenges. His writing, while often disturbing, offers a window into a mind grappling with autism, societal pressures, and a desperate need for connection.
It also highlights the importance of understanding the context of someone's behavior. His anger, his cynicism, his disturbing fantasies, these are all symptoms of a deeper pain, a sense of isolation, and a lack of support.
It's a reminder that we can't just judge people based on their words or their actions. We need to try to understand the underlying reasons behind their behavior, to see the human being beneath the surface, and to offer compassion and support even when it's difficult.
Kevin's story also raises important questions about the accessibility and effectiveness of mental health services, particularly for young adults navigating complex emotional landscapes. It's clear that he needs help, but the system has failed him in many ways, leaving him feeling distrustful and abandoned.
His experiences highlight the need for greater